Last week I was talking about triplicity lords and the idea that triplicity lords support a natural significator. They are trying to support the process of generation and maturation a um, of some quality through the triplicities, because each triplicity has a convertible, fixed, and mutable or double-bodied sign that shows generation, maturation, and then corruption. And I was giving you some keywords where the significator talks about the intrinsic or foundational worth, esteem, or appropriateness of its energy or impulse, whatever you want to call it, such as Venus for love. And the triplicity lords show whether and how there is ongoing assistance and support, whether this energy increases or decreases over time, the idea that this energy could be protected and preserved and remain stable and be present. And I think that's kind of where we left it. I thought I think I covered these two bullet points, that the things that make a triplicity lord good will indicate that that energy will lead to or involve some good fortune, social respect, consistency, and smoothness. And that bad triplicity lords indicate hindrances, social disrespect, unsteadiness, being in need, or suffering bad things. And so things like being in need, if you think about that idea of presence, Dorotheus talks about this in relation to the Father, and looking at the Son and his triplicity lords. So he says that good triplicity lords for the Father not only make the Father present and respected, so there's positive paternal energy in the native's life, and might even preserve the native's inheritance, but that weak triplicity lords might harm the inheritance or even mean that the native is thrown out of the house and is so deprived of the father's presence or support entirely. And you can imagine that there's other ways this could happen. Maybe the father abandons the family or something, so that the triplicity lords are not just talking about whether the energy is good or bad, but whether it's even present or not. So these are some of the key words. And I have here a little section from your Sol book. This is in your assigned readings, and this is about Venus and her triplicity lords. And here we're looking at Venus to evaluate the general quality of the Venusian energy. And then throughout this section, and some of this comes right from Dorotheus, we're looking at the triplicity lords. And so we have, for example, in sentence 14, this is in chapter 7.1, he's talking about whether the if that the triplicity lords are bad, but Venus is in a good condition. So the basic quality is good and strong, but it has little support. So what he says is, if you found the lords of the triplicities in a bad position, made unfortunate, but Venus is with Jupiter in an excellent position, then he will marry, the native will marry, but because of the corruption of the lords of the triplicities and their misfortune, he will get harm and loss from his women. So it's like the Venus energy is strong enough to provide marriage, but things kind of fall apart after that. So there's no support over time. So that would be good significator, bad triplicity lords. Then he covers situations where Venus and Jupiter, or let's just say Venus, is in a bad condition, and the triplicity lords are in a bad condition. And then in sentence 17, he says, this is where we compare the two lords, and we will talk about early life and later life. He says, if you found the first lord of the triplicity of Venus in an excellent position, and the second one in a bad position, falling, but Venus is in an excellent place, then he will marry at the beginning of his life, but it will worsen with his women at the end of his life, and his condition in women will be difficult. So Venus has good power and quality. The native can marry and have some success, but the success will be more early on because the first lord is in a good condition. But the secondary lord, which governs later time, is in a bad situation. So over time, the quality goes down. And so this is the general way we want to think about this basic idea of support and presence. So I have some material on the father, but here I'm showing you some readings about the sect light for eminence and happiness and life purpose. Jupiter is used for fertility, Venus for love, and then there's a very short passage on the sect light for travel. This is something that might seem unexpected, that they would use the sect light to see if the native travels. So read these sections, and they'll give you the material kind of repeats itself, but it's a good way to see how they're thinking about this idea of support and presence, including over time. Now, what are the things that make a triplicity lord perform well? Here's a list that we can find. The first is that it's dynamically angular. Whole sign angles seem to be important, but I would say especially dynamic angularity, so that they're advancing. So an advancing angular triplicity lord would be the best. Is it in a good or bad place? Is it out of the rays or is it under the rays? Being out of the rays is better. They would like the triplicity lords to be in their own dignity. And, a lot of this is normal things. Relationship to the sun, having dignity, what place is it in, what dynamic, quantity it has. When they talk about triplicity, or dignity rather, they especially want the triplicity lords to be in their own triplicity. And although they don't say it explicitly, I think what they mean is they want the triplicity lords to be in that very triplicity. What I mean is, Venus is a triplicity lord for both watery and earthy signs. Well, if the triplicity lords we're looking at are the earthy ones, we would want Venus to be in the earthy signs, as well as some other dignity. So maybe she's in Taurus, so she's in her own sign, but she's also in the earthy signs, so that the triplicity lord that's trying to do the support is also in that very triplicity. So you can see what that would mean is that the planet is in a member of that triplicity and then also trines the other signs. They would like the triplicity lords to be configured with the general significator. And of course, if those triplicity lords were in that same triplicity, they would be trining the general significator. And generally, they would like the triplicity lords to be configured with fortunes, not badly configured to the infortune contrary to the sect, and so on. So a lot of this is normal astrology, but these are things that they will specifically mention again and again, especially Valens in his um, in his chart examples. So I've given you a couple of chart examples here that come from Valens. And you can, well, one is from Valens, another is from Dorotheus. So these are from their books. I'll let you read them yourself. I think I want to jump immediately to the Hitler chart. We're going to look at his triplicity lords of the sect light. This is something you'll do, I think, for the homework. For the triplicity lord of the sect light, we're thinking of the luminaries as the general significator, and they are meant to be general indicators of things like eminence, status, success, and in general, your life path. So they're general significators of life and the issue of, are you on a path that's leading somewhere that's successful, and what is helping you along, and do you have support in that life path? Uh, so and what's implied is that people with weak triplicity lords of the sect light don't really have the support, don't have the kind of direction. And Robert Schmidt has suggested that we think of triplicity lords as being like wind in the sails of a ship, so that the it's kind of like, and so as my friend Charlie Obert puts it, the question is, are you in a big beautiful steamliner, or are you in a rowboat? Is your life more like this big ship or a rowboat? And if the triplicity lords and the sect light are in a bad condition, your life is more like a rowboat than a big ship. So let's take a look at the generally accepted Hitler chart. And the sect light is the sun, because it's a diurnal chart. You can see the sun's above the horizon. The ascendant is Libra, so the lord of the ascendant is Venus. And the sect light, the sun, is in the 8th. It's a bad place, but you can see he is dynamically angular. In fact, he's probably the most dynamically angular, unless you count Mercury, chart in the planet in the chart. There's nothing. There's a whole sign square from Saturn. He's with Mars in the same sign, but quantitatively, let's just stipulate that he's in a strong condition. But he's not in any dignity. He needs some support. So we have he's in an earthy sign. So the triplicity lords of Earth by day are, in order, Venus and the Moon. And then the Mars is the third one. We normally ignore it. So what we want to do is look at the two supports here, the Venus and the Moon. So let's start first with the Moon. We're gonna analyze their quantitative strength and then start to interpret them. So here we have the Moon, or sorry, Venus. Well, she's dynamically angular. She's in the 7th division. She's in her own sign, and she's also in her own triplicity, the same triplicity we're concerned about, the earthy one. So right away, and she's out of the rays, although she's about to go under them. She's, at least in her own right, in a pretty good condition, strong. But she is in a bad place, and look at her aspects here. She's conjoined in the same degree with Mars, which is the infortune contrary to the sect. And then we've got a square within 3 degrees of Saturn. Saturn in detriment. In fact, he's a strong Saturn in detriment. And because she's retrograde, she's going backwards towards both of those aspects. So she's not besieged by them, but she is in a conjunction and square with them. So this is not good, and this is one of the situations we've talked about as being called maltreatment. So let's start out by saying that the native's life path has some good support and success, but meets with a number of dangers and unsteadiness. So we could start with that. Now, if we wanted to interpret this like, okay, so Venus is supporting him, what does that mean? It doesn't sound like a Hitler. But if you remember that before he entered into politics, which was after World War I, he was an artist. And you might remember that he tried to get into the Vienna School of Art, I think, twice, and he was rejected. But before then, he was an opera fanatic, and he was part of this German movement, this or cultural phenomenon in German music, where art was extremely exalted as a cultural product, as a key to life, and that proper art was a measure of civilizational and psychological success and so on. This was a big thing in Germany. And if you think about it, if you remember, there were some famous incidents like it was a Nazi exhibition of they called it degenerate art, and this was a big public event. And even at the very end of the war, he was working with with an assistant who was an architect whose name I'm blanking on. Some of you might remember it. Anyway, redesigning the architecture.
Albert Speer.
Speer, yeah. Redesigning the architecture of Berlin to be this magnificent artistic city with huge domes and everything. So, and not only that, but as time went on, especially, Hitler was thinking of himself as almost like a tragic character in a German Wagnerian opera, replete with violence and death. It was almost as though he saw himself and Germany as being in the midst of a grand violent opera. And if you can see, you see these malefic planets harming the Venus and adding their malefic qualities to this Venus. You can maybe see that sense of doom and the drama, the violence, and the doom, all with an artistic edge to it. Another thing to know about him at the beginning, which a lot of people don't know, is that when he was young, he spent a number of years in homeless shelters. He left the farm where he grew up. He went to Vienna, and he had no money, and he was painting. He was painting. He was painting postcards for tourists, and then selling postcards. And he could make a little money doing that, but he was living in poverty, in homeless men's shelters, and they would go out and do, they would shovel snow, or the homeless men would, I'm sure happens now, they would tell each other, "Oh, if you go to this woman's house, she'll give you a little bit of food." So look again at this Venus, this retrograde Venus in the eighth, harmed by the malefics. So he was in great poverty as well in the early part of his life. So we have both this situation with Venus and the two malefics well describes the suffering, the poverty, also the growing, anger, and this kind of twisted artistic vision of life that he was going through. So it turns out that this Venus actually says a lot about where his life was going, and what was contributing to his sense of his mission in those early years. The second lord is Venus, and you can see she's in the whole sign fourth. So she's in the fourth. She is dynamically cadent, so she's angular cadent. And she is in detriment, and she is with Jupiter, who you can see is in his fall. It's probably also important that they're with the tail. And Jupiter is Lord of the sixth. So the second part of his life has less support because of the weakness of the planets, and her being with a planet in fall who is also the Lord of the sixth. And this puzzled me for a while. I read this great long early biography of him, and then I remembered then there were two things I remembered. For thinking about his sense of mission and life path, what is the fourth? Well, the fourth is land. Land, the ancestors, okay, the people, or in German, the Volk. Well, the second part of his life was taken up by actually taking back land, conquering land, to to redeem land for the German people. So if we think of this, the moon in the fourth, in political terms, that's land and the people, and so we're now getting content. We're not just saying the moon is weak, but we're getting content. And historians generally agree that the real disaster in his life came when he decided to, after invading Europe, he decided to invade Russia, and that invasion was the disaster. And the moment that he did that, it was inevitable that the war was going to be over. And we'll see that when we look at timing in the next part of the course, we'll see that we can time the invasion using this moon. So the moon is telling us about the sense of direction and support for life, and that it's weak and has serious problems. And we're going to see, we can tell when that moon was activated finally, and it was at the invasion. She's also with a planet in fall, and that's one of the standard bad things to have happen. It is Jupiter. He's the fortune of the sect, and so maybe that gives some kind of initial success. But he is in fall, and he's the Lord of the sixth. And the other thing that Toland, that's the biographer, one thing that he points out, and you might have heard this or know this, that as the war went on, um, physically, Hitler was a wreck. He was probably not helping himself with his very weak, he had a very weak vegetarian diet, not a lot of weak soups. It seems not a lot of nutrition, but also you might have heard about the hand having like hand tremors. He had to hold his hand because of the tremors. But also, what Toland says is he had these complaints, and he had some quack doctors that the generals and the staff around him didn't approve of these doctors, and the doctors would give him one treatment, and that would lead to problems. So they would medicate him with something else to take care of those problems. But those led to other symptoms. So he was taking all of these pills and treatments until finally, Toland says he had a machine where every morning this machine, you would put cocaine in the machine and it would turn it into a vapor. And so he was literally huffing cocaine at least once a day from this machine. So you can imagine what kind of a mental and physical wreck he was turning himself into. And we can see that symbolism directly by the Lord of the Sixth in fall, dragging down this moon, this triplicity lord. So with these triplicity lords, we're suddenly getting a very vivid description of at least two phases and two types of activities in his life that are driving him forward and motivating him. And it's something that normally you wouldn't think that. I mean, Venus is the lord of his ascendant, but the moon, you might not connect to that idea of the life path without the idea of triplicity lords. And so with the symbolism of Jupiter being in fall and the moon in detriment, which the general symbolism is things falling apart, it was under the influence of this lunar triplicity lord that everything fell apart. So we go from strength with the Venus, strength with problems, to downfall with the moon. So that's the kind of thing that you can do with triplicity lords of the sect light and Venus and all of the rest. And the triplicity lords of the sect light are good to do with a client if you're thinking about the general sense of their mission in life, and whether certain activities or areas of life will be stronger than others. What should they be emphasizing? So they should be emphasizing the stronger of the triplicity lords. Well, in prediction, I've talked about how the first lord is generally earlier in life, the second lord is later in life. But what does that mean? Like, what is earlier and later? We will learn some precise methods for identifying when each triplicity lord is activated. I think some modern astrologers think that the break happens definitely at one particular time, and Valens kind of talks that way. But then he starts adding more rules, and you can see it's not really consistent. The method that we will use will identify actual dates, and we'll see that the dates are interspersed. So that, like with the Hitler chart, yeah, early on we get more Venus generally, but if we start assigning the ages, we'll find that there's a Venus date, and then maybe another Venus date, and then moon, and then Venus. So the dates will become interspersed. So there isn't a clear, simple break between the early Lord and the later Lord. We'll just try to treat it generally. But I would tell you that if you look at Dorotheus and Valens, they do not assign dates or time periods for the third Lord, the partner. Actually, because of that, I've never really experimented with the third Lord. That might be interesting to do when we get to it. Is try to find the exact dates for that third Lord. So what ended up happening though is that in some version of Dorotheus, some Arab writers used, when they talked about Venus and her triplicity lords, they used all three. And so some of them said, well, maybe we divide the life equally into like 25-year sections. So the first Lord is the first 25 years, second Lord is from 25 to 50, and the third Lord is 50 to 75. Some people tried doing that. But it seems that this whole idea of the third Lord having a distinct period isn't what they did. It was just early life and later life. So we're going to ignore that third Lord. We're going to officially ignore that third Lord as being a time of life. But when we're looking for specific events, it might be interesting to experiment seeing what happens with it. So we'll come back to that in section or in part 2.